Hello and welcome to what amounts to a part 2. So I did a video on magic systems where I broke down how I made a magic system for my comic book, The Scourge of Ninepoint. And so today I am fulfilling the promise. I'm going to be talking about world building in general, how I do that, and how I went and made Ninepoint. So you can learn a bit about my comic Ninepoint and its world and how much work I've put into it, while also trying to sort of learn how to go about world building yourself for your own comic. The very first thing that I started with was my concept. Same concept as my last video. I wanted a world where Calicos were oppressed, and my main character is a rare male Calico who was raised by raccoons. So that is the basic, something's going on upstairs. That is the most basic idea that I was started with. From there, I built my magic system. Check out that video. But the gist of it is that there is soul magic based on cats having 9 lives. There's a spirit world where white cats live because they're connected to the spirit world. There's pointed cats, which are knights, and there's, of course, Calico oppression. With that in mind, I then added more to my ideas list. What did I want out of this? Well, first and foremost, I wanted a medieval society. I wanted that aesthetic, that sort of fantasy aesthetic, very classic, good vibes, good times. So I definitely wanted that, but I didn't want to set it in Europe. I didn't want a European setting. I wanted Canada. There's many reasons why I wanted Canada. Okay, one reason is that I think it would be really cool to go across Canada, and if I'm writing a book about Canada, I can write off business expenses and travel, and that'd be cool. The second reason is that I actually do kind of care about the environment, and I care about wildlife in general, and in the future, I think it'd be really cool to, do split profit things, or do, I don't know, just anything that's, encourages people to think Canada's pretty cool, because Canada is pretty cool. It's got a lot of good boys in it. By that, I mean animals, and they're really good. And whenever I'm writing Ninepoint, it just really makes me want to go on my nature walks, and I've just gotten so much nature looking at. And it gave me lots of excuses to just learn about the world around me, the different wildlife, and yeah, it's just been a really good time, and I like just getting involved with that stuff. Being able to make my book more authentic with that's also pretty cool. The next thing I wanted was, I didn't want required cannibalism. That is an issue with anthros, is you always have to figure out how they eat. I definitely didn't want a world where cats were forced to eat people, and other other civilized beings that had families and could talk and have emotions. I didn't really want required cannibalism to be embedded in my world. And I also didn't want to go the Beastars route, where they're eating eggs from sentient chickens. Not gonna knock that, it's just not what I was going for. Also, in line with that, really wanted some cool mounts. Well, I didn't put horses in Ninepoint. Guys, I love deer, and I just want cats riding deer. I think that'd be really cool and neat. Okay, so that is the entire story. That is my world building wants. With that in mind, I then started to create my world. Ninepoint is in a medieval Canada-sized Canada biome place. I decided on a flat Earth. I don't know why. I just think it's cool. I don't have to worry about other continents existing. It's surrounded entirely by the spirit world, so I get to do a little bit of magical time BS where I'm I can make the climates do whatever I want. And in the winter, the birds go to the spirit realm, so we fixed that problem. So I made a map. That was really cool. I made it to scale so that I can better track how long it takes people to travel to different places. That was a whole thing. I then decided that for my anthros, in order to avoid the cannibalism problem and get cool mounts, I would set in place rules for what is allowed to be an anthro, and the rule is pretty simple. If you are a mammal and you are not an ungulate, you are a anthro. As far as anthros go, horses couldn't be an anthro. I didn't add horses. Deer can't be an anthro. Not cephalopods. Cephalopods. Well, cephalopods can't be. Cetacea. Is it cetacea? I don't know. Whales and things. They can't be anthros because they are ungulates. So I just made that really simple, easy breakdown so I could still have herbivores and stuff. So yeah, that's what I ended up deciding on. And that in turn means that animals in this world have similar diets to what they would eat IRL, but there's room for differences. Not huge differences, but because the ecosystem is shifted in this, because now, mice aren't things you can eat, I fill in spaces with like birds and reptiles and insects and things and ungulates. I also decided that the animals would be proportional. So that was a whole day and a half of my life where I was determining the proportionality of different animals, so how big they would be. I have a huge height chart in my house that you can see if you look at my vlogs. It's just on the wall, so you can see how tall different animals are each other. So a bat in the Ninepoint world is about 2 feet tall compared to a cat. So it was, in order to make the smaller animals a bit larger and the larger animals a bit smaller, everything's kind of proportional, is what I decided on. But I also just thought it was really cute if they weren't all human height. I also just thought it would be really scary to have I don't know, it would just be overwhelming to write a story where there's just giant bat people. It just wasn't the story I'm looking for. I wanted there to be tons of bats, so they had to be little itty bitty guys. With that, all that stuff is I'm willing to make slight changes for the sake of cool. So elk are the main mounts I have decided for Ninepoint. However, an elk could never support your back. It doesn't have the spine required to do that. So I decided that their spines are just a little stronger, just because, they've been bred for this. There's more domesticated animals cats have access to that wouldn't really be the case IRL, because man, are North American and mammals skittish little things. So that's my deal there. So then I really started to kind of get in deep, have my rules set. Let's build Ninepoint. So we're going to go kind of step by step with this, talk about the different aspects, because world building tends to be, you dive really deep into one or two aspects. I didn't do that as much as I should have. I definitely dug deeper and deeper into other aspects because I just have the time to do it. I'm not going to get into every single bit of world building because that'd be super overwhelming, because there's over 100 mammalian species that I could talk about, which, as fun as I would be, I'd like this video to not be 5 hours long. So we're just going to go over the main points. We're going to start with the Ninepoint Empire, though, because that is our biggest section of world building, and it was definitely the part that I dug into the most. So what you need to know about the Ninepoint Empire is that it is big. It is at the center of our flat Earth world. It was formed after the unification of the 8 kingdoms. So everything's kind of based around the idea of 9 points within the empire, and I like to reflect that throughout larger aspects of world building I might not get into because spoilers, but the way that Ninepoint was formed was there used to be many different cat societies. They sort of settled out into 9 kingdoms, and each of these kingdoms held sort of a value that would later be referred to as the 9 points. And from sort of I've developed all of these kingdoms, not going to get into the history of Ninepoint, but the basics of it is that one of the kingdoms was destroyed, and that was the Fawn Kingdom, and the Fawn point has to do with self-sacrifice, so that is why it is the unification of the 8 kingdoms, and in spirit, the 9th kingdom, which was the Fawn Kingdom. Ninepoint, it goes back a couple hundred years as far as history goes. The greater history of Ninepoint is a couple thousand years, but current history before a big sort of cataclysm involving Calicos happened. Current history only goes back a couple hundred years, and since then there's been a long line of kings descended from the original 9 rulers. As far as society goes for Ninepoint, it is very crappy to be a Calico or a Wildlander, which is the term they use to describe anything that is not a cat. Ninepoint has some more openness towards like women and queer people, that queer citizens, than our world does in like than medieval our world does. So lady cats can be knights. They can hold positions of power. The system is a little bit patriarchal though, and there is like a tendency to like care more about the mask, the men's. But in the past, in like the formation of Ninepoint, for the longest time, there's just been like women involved, and that just has kind of stayed the course, though it is kind of dying out, especially as things with Calicos start ramping up. There is just a larger percent of the population that is male, because as another world building aspect goes, Calicos are oppressed and they don't really exist in society, and because of that there's just more males around, which means that maybe they need to start considering not having lady fighters, but they haven't quite gotten to that point yet. But it is on the table, and sentiments are changing, and yeah, that's just something to consider. One of the main reasons that I decided this was I just didn't really want to write like a super sexist society, because it just gets boring. I just get bored. I understand the place for it, but I just get bored of reading stories that are like that. And it just isn't something I super wanted to tackle. And I just wanted to have open gay characters, so shoot me, okay? Like, just let me live. So that is the basics. I guess that leads into sort of Calicos as a topic, so I wrote that as like a subheading here. So as far as Calicos go, for the longest time, they've just not been considered actual cats. There's a lot of history about that. Definitely something that is best explored within the context of the book rather than just a YouTube video. But Calicos are not seen as actual cats. They're seen as a monster. They're seen as like something bad that happens to you, to like your baby in the womb as they become a Calico. They're corrupted. It's ruined, okay? Ninepoint at this point in the story has successfully murdered every single Calico in existence. They have gotten rid of all of the adult Calicos to their knowledge. They look around elsewhere to make sure that they have gotten rid of all of them, but most of their effort now is on keeping the population from ever coming back. So baby Calicos, they're just killed on the spot. And the way that the society kind of deals with that is that they have a thing called the census. And so Bluepoint cats, Bluepoint knights, will go into different towns and villages, and they'll keep track of every single citizen and whether or not they're having a baby, who's died, just normal citizen stuff, just normal census stuff. But they also pay extra close attention to whether or not any Calicos are born. And if they are gotten rid of. Not the nicest thing in this society at all. If you're thinking about hiding your kitten, you can get into some big amounts of trouble, because Bluepoints, again, can see souls. So if you're hiding a kitten, they're gonna know that it's in your house, and they're going to inspect it, and if it is a Calico, they're gonna get rid of it, and if they suspected that you were trying to hide it, you can also be gotten rid of too, the harm that you are causing the kingdom by allowing a Calico to live. How dare you? So yeah, smuggling Calicos, super illegal. Protecting them, super illegal. And for the most part, the citizens, this has been going on for so many years. It's so normalized in their society. Most cats have the same view as the Empire. They think that if we allow Calicos to exist, the world is going to end. So I'm doing my part by getting rid of this kitten, even though it's sad. they kind of see it as, if you've had a kitten and it turned out to be a calico, it's already dead. You've already lost the kitten at that point. If you have a kitten that is born with orange and black fur and they don't have any white fur, they're then given a registration and a little pin to wear. It's a tortoiseshell registration, because as torties get old, they can get white flecks in their fur, and you wouldn't want to be mistaken for one of those bad calico people. So make sure you get your pin and keep your registration up to date. And that is how the census works. Another important part of the census is to track down white cats. Again, they're magical too, so let's kind of get into the Society of White Cats, which I also had to develop. In the case of the census, the only thing they are looking for is whether your white cat has blue eyes or one blue eye and one green eye. Anything else, and you're fine. If you have a white cat and its eyes haven't opened yet, then they will come back for you later. Blue-eyed cats and odd-eyed cats are then referred to the Temple of White, which is sort of like a monastery of white cats. And the reason that you do this is because blue-eyed cats, their souls exist in the spirit world, and they're kind of just going to live in the spirit world all of their life. As such, they just kind of get taken by the Temple of White, and they take care of them. Odd-eyed cats are kind of enlisted to help take care of the blue-eyed cats and be liaisons between the worlds, and it's just kind of their duty as someone who is born like that. It kind of sucks, but again, this is like a medieval society, so your child, you know, that they're destined to kind of be whatever you are. And if they're a white cat, then they're destined to kind of go and be spirit world kitties and do all that nonsense. And in some cases, it's not super bad. Like, if you are living an impoverished life and you have a little white kitty, that kitty gets to go live in the spirit temple. And while there is still class distinctions in the spirit world, and the noble white kitties have it better than the poor ones, they still have a pretty decent life because they learn to read, and they're not fighting wars, they're not breaking their backs or doing anything. It's mostly just cleaning and stuff. It's all right. It's all right. The spirit world is dangerous, though. Well, that is the bad side of it. But it's not like the white cats cause that by taking you. Get awoken in the spirit world by a white cat, but you're kind of by another white cat. But you're kind of destined to wake up in the spirit world at some point, and it's better if someone gets you and ushers you safely out, ushers you into the temple. So the spirit world is kind of cloaked in this haze, this purple haze. In the distance, there's a big scary castle, and there's like a huge maze in the haze. It's a haze maze, and it's all very dangerous. There's monsters that go throughout it. There's ghosts. There's just a lot of trouble. It's where you go when you die. It's where your souls go, and it's a lot safer inside the temple. You get woken up, and they quickly take the little baby soul cat into the temple where they can be safe from all that. And that's sort of why you end up in the monastery. You live your life like that. You live with your new family. It sucks, but it's also okay, I guess. It's better than being a calico. As far as knights go, it's very similar to actual knights. We've moved topics now. At the age of 7, a little pointed cat is allowed to enlist to become a page. You're more likely to get into this line of work if you're noble, but you're also very likely to be of noble lineage or knightly lineage if you are a pointed cat, since it is genetic. You work as a page until you're like the age of 14, and if you really can prove yourself, you then can become a squire, where you serve under one specific knight, because the little younger kittens just kind of work around the castle doing duties and such. If you are chosen as a squire, you can eventually become a knight of your own and go do all that. But for the most part, it's actually kind of boring to be a knight. There's not any current real wars or struggles going on. Most of the major conflicts are with the Wildlands. And if you're a Blue Point, you're just doing census work. You're just going to keep your eye on the population and make sure calicos don't come into existence. So that's what it's like to be a knight currently. So I guess that all leaves me to the Wildlands, which is the rest of the world. Like the Ninepoint is huge, but the world is huger. There's a lot more to it. I tend to talk in cat terms when I'm talking about the Wildlands, but the Wildlands themselves are a lot more complicated than cats like to put them. So the Wildlands is where all non-cats live, and cats refer to non-cats as Wildlanders, and Wildlanders don't use this term. Like, if you live along the border, you're going to know the term Wildlander, but as you get further in, like, if you call a possum a Wildlander, they would have no idea what you're talking about. Those who have interactions with cats might find it, like, an offensive term, because it implies that you're just all the same, which you are not. You're all very different. Non-cats don't live in the Empire. It's just not allowed. There's some bordering cities where the rules get skirted a bit, but for the most part, they don't intermingle, or at least they don't happily intermingle. There's some places where cats have taken over in the Wildlands to use resources, but other than that, there's mostly a divide. If anything, it's cats going into the Wildlands rather than Wildlanders going into Ninepoint. Like I said, they're all relatively sized. Mice are very small. Wolves are very big. They all have their own distinct cultures that I've made up. I'm probably not going to get into all of them, but I've written down a few, which I'll get into. Cats are always pushing boundaries, like I said, and they're always trying to stake claims and be big bullies. Caniforms, so dog-like carnivores, are kind of the biggest threat to cats, and they're very sus on them, whereas feliforms, while they're very huge, things like pumas and lynxes and things, they're bigger, but as far as their societies go, they don't form big groups like wolves do. They can't like group together. They just don't get along super well. They like to kind of be apart. So let's kind of get into the geography a bit about Ninepoint. So Ninepoint is separated into the capital, the Catspital, and Greater Ninepoint. It's kind of like Niagara region. It's the warmest place on Earth. On their Earth, it's good for like agriculture, though they're cats, so they don't eat fruit. They just will feed their animals. They can do that kind of agriculture. Beyond Ninepoint, we get into the meadow, the greenwood, the pinewood, the frozen forest, the prairies, the mountains, and the sea. While cats consider all of these places to be distinct regions, it's kind of arbitrary. The Wildlanders would divide things up very differently, again, because they're different cultures. They're not just dividing each other based on the landmarks of the world. So the meadow borders all of Ninepoint. It just circles around it. It's kind of our southern Ontario sort of region. Within southern Ontario, it would probably be smaller, honestly. It's where all the unrest occurs. It's where the most conflict between Wildlanders and cats occurs. Most cats that live along the meadow have seen Wildlanders before, while those in the Catspital might not have even seen one in their life. The biggest concern coming from the meadow is coyotes. Coyotes lurk about. They sometimes steal stuff from cats. The biggest issue with for the Wildlanders is more cats trying to push the boundary of where the border is. And, burning places down. Heck. Then there's the greenwood, which is kind of beyond the meadow. And it looks very small on the map, but it's a very long distance. It's sort of the southern Ontario forest region, where the sort of like, in the context of our world, it'd be along the Great Lakes, where it's mostly deciduous trees. It's actually very far from Ninepoint in this, and most most people living in the Greenwood, especially further out, have never seen a cat before. They know of their existence, unlike other parts of the world where cats are just not something you've really heard of necessarily. And it's far more densely populated in the Greenwood than it is the Meadow, because less cats to deal with. So after that, we have Pinewood. It's where Amanda lives. That's a joke. I add Pinewood to everything for some reason. It circles the Greenwood. It's more of like a graceful transition to the Pinewood. Again, it's not like a hard line. It's suddenly Pinewood. It's more like upper southern Ontario, not going into the north quite yet. And it's the transition into the Canadian Shield from there. Once you're in the Pinewood, you're beyond the point of really having to deal with cats for the most part, aside from like mining issues or cats taking timber or whatever. You're basically, some parts you're just not going to have heard of a cat before. And with that said, most cats haven't even seen a pine tree before. Like, they've only really seen deciduous trees. They're like, what is this? You mean its leaves do not fall? Unheard of. Okay, that's cats. Beyond the Pinewood is the frozen forest. It's really far from Ninepoint at this point. Most cats never gonna see this in their life. In our world, it's 80% of Canada. It's the cold woods region. It's the taiga. It's what Costco toilet paper is made of. It's the taiga. It's big. It's beautiful. It's bountiful. It's really close. It's closer to the spirit world in Ninepoint than it is the Empire of Ninepoint. So again, not going to really know about cats all that much. Then there's the tundra. The tundra is the tundra. Pretty self-explanatory. It's kind of right along the edge of the world. After the tundra, you get into the Arctic, where there's polar bears. Cats are kind of scared of the tundra. There's lots of spooky stories about it, because it is kind of a really hard place to live, and they just got lots of really weird ideas about what the tundra is like. Once you get past it, you go into the Arctic, and beyond the Arctic is where you can actually start to see the spirit world. The spirit world isn't kind of like a hard line either. Like, if you just travel, you'll eventually end up in it. Whether it's because you died or not is a completely different story. After that, we have the prairies. The prairies is where the biggest civilization of wolves live. Ninepoint does not consider this a civilization, because only they are civilized enough to have created like real architecture and like real things. They don't consider what the wolves have done here to be all that civilized. That said, it's like a really big city. It's where they rule. The cats can't make any headway in it because wolves are giant. And when a whole bunch of them live together, you're kind of screwed. It's where all the bison are. Well, not all of the bison, because there's wood bison, right? But it's where all the prairie bison are, and the wolves eat them. They go nom nom. Cats want to go nom nom, but they're not allowed, because cats are bad. Get out of our prairies. So then there's the mountains. No one's really scaled them ever before. Again, this is more of a place where we'll eventually vanish into the spirit world. Same thing in the prairies. If you go out beyond and into the desert, beyond where the swift foxes live, you're going to end up in the spirit world too. And finally, we have the sea. Same deal as all those. The sea is also where you're going to find mer people. Right? Because we've got like seals and sea lions which live, and they go do their thing. So that's pretty cool. Cats really want to go to the sea, but it's also spooky out there. They want fish, but do they want it that bad? This is the forever question of Ninepoint. Do we get the fish? What about water? Yeah, so I did a lot of research on just like what the world is like. And that's what I came up with. Yay for me. Finally, I'm going to just like dive into a few the Wildlanders, namely coyotes, wolves, and raccoons, because there's some main characters in those categories, and just talk generally about how I created Wildlanders. So what I did was stupid. I researched like every single species. Like, I wrote down like every single species that lives in Canada. I was like, what are all the mammals? And I did it. And then I studied each and every one of them and then created like how they would structure their families. I kind of converted the animalness into a sort of accurate society, and I just wanted something kind of interesting. So like big cats kind of live on their own, and I wanted to keep that once creating them into anthros. And there was like just unique aspects of each animal and how they lived, and then I would want to convert that to make more sense as like a civilization, and also make sense within the context of not being able to like shoot out 500 babies in the span of like a month, right? Like I don't want my mice like that, but they live in large communities and all that jazz and things. And again, I would just like scuff things if I wanted them to be. If I wanted them to work within the context of my world, I was willing to change things. But also, I really wanted to keep kind of the unique aspects of each species and things that I didn't necessarily know about them, just to push myself out of what my comfort zone would be for making these different creatures. And beyond that, I also, on a complete aside, when I was thinking about Ninepoint, I also had to take into consideration if I'm using like a land that exists in the real world, I can't just exclusively just take all of the animals, all of the terrain, the biomes and everything, and leave behind any baggage that comes with the said country, because it's kind of inevitable, because I'm also writing a story that has very imperialistic cats that are definitely colonizers, and like I just also tried to take that into consideration, even though I know I'm gonna like mess up certain aspects of that. But I knew that was like an inevitable thing, so I also tried to look into, I don't know, just like history with Canada and its like native populations, because man, that is some really crappy stuff right there. And I just didn't want to like steal experiences, steal cultural aspects, and just like walk all over them and be a trashy person. So I just tried to be conscious of that. And yeah, I don't know. that was just something to be aware of, and I think it's good to be aware of that sort of thing, even though you're gonna mess up inevitably. I think one of the largest aspects was thinking of that like in the context of like the prairies and bison, because that was a whole big horrible mess right there. Yeah, but I didn't want to just like make direct parallels. And I also with that I also had to think about like how cats other the different species of Ninepoint, and making sure that I didn't always think of things through the lens of cats. I also think about that when I'm writing stories, is like I don't want to constantly have cats being the solution to the problems of the other species. Like even if they're not a direct parallel, there are like there are some like parallels that I just gotta be aware of. So I don't know, that was very inarticulate and I'm very sorry. So let's move into some of the animals that I've created. So what I decided for wolves and coyotes is that there are many different groups of wolves throughout Ninepoint, because wolves have a very large spread, or at the very least they used to have a very large reach, and they can live in all sorts of climates. There's like Arctic wolves, there's prairie wolves, there's all sorts of wolves. Wolves live all over the world, so there's all sorts of different little wolf societies throughout Ninepoint, and for the most part they live in small family groups. They hunt along a select range. Unlike IRL wolves, they tend not to get into huge battles with each other. They tend to respect each other's ranges. Occasionally there's going to be fights, but for the most part, wolves are dealing with the rest of the world. Wolves are very dogmatic. They follow a religion. They're dog disciples, most of them. they believe in these greater beings called dogs, which created the world with what is known to them as the Big Bark. Wolves believe that other dog-like creatures, such as foxes and coyotes, they did something maybe wrong in another life or something like that. Something about their soul is tarnished and they need to repent in order to find their place amongst the dogs once they eventually do pass on. Wolves can breed with coyotes. This is like the one case of interspecial breeding that can occur in Ninepoint. Other than that, no. There's no hybrids or anything like that. It's also very frowned upon for coyotes and wolves to be together because of the baggage there, with coyotes being deemed lesser. And coyotes are kind of off-put by wolves in general, since like the wolves seem to think that they're trying to help the coyotes. The coyotes kind of just want to be left alone, and they don't really trust wolves, and wolves are big and scary, and coyotes are not necessarily always hanging out in large groups like wolves are. They'll hang out with their family, or they'll kind of be alone. But yeah, for the most part, they're put off by the bullying nature of wolves. And yeah, so that's some of the details about wolves. They also have their big prairie society. The prairie wolves have a much larger type structure. Wolves tend to have a matriarch rather than a patriarch. They also, they work closely with their fam. They fam buddies. Another one I created were the Raccoon Society. Raccoons have very strong gender roles compared to other societies. I on a side note, I kind of liked there to be like negative aspects to different societies as well as like more positive aspects. I didn't want one to be purely good or evil. I mean, cats are kind of like really crappy, and no one matches cats because they have all the power and they're wielding it very poorly. But as far as like the conflicts between like different wildlanders, I wanted them to have just different societies. So raccoons, they live in very gender-restricted societies where the lady raccoons have like an entire village that they have created, and in this village is where the children are raised, and the male raccoons, after they reach kind of their teenage years, are no longer allowed to be in the society, in the village anymore. They kind of get shunned out, and they have to go find a pack of male raccoons to hang out with. The male and female raccoons never really meet within the village, but they will meet outside of it to hang out. And yeah, it's just very gender segregated, and the women do all of the raising of children in that raccoon society. Another society is the bat society. There's all sorts of different types of bats, of course, but there's one large there's several very large colonies, but there's one very large colony within the Greenwood where a lot of little brown bats live, and during the winter they welcome all sorts of bats from all over the world to come nestle with them, because more bats means more warmth for them, but they live all year round in the colony. They tend to have more like a polyamorous society where one bat lady will have several fellas who help them be a family. So there's bat society. It's much more wholesome. All for one. They go flap a flap. And that is my world building. I have like I said, I have like 100 different little creature societies. Ninepoint I spent way too much work on, and this video is way too long, and I don't even know if Ursula has enough footage to cover it. So, man. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.